The big reason why I wrote this book was because, society says that the person who is sitting alone at the cafeteria is doing so because he or she is an introvert that likes their solitude. And that may very well be the case in many different cases. However, the person sitting alone could just be sitting there because they were extremely shy and have extreme social anxiety. And they could be a really social person, but their brain, their nervous system just doesn't let them. And really what social anxiety is essentially what happens is it essentially strips your nervous system from having free will. And what I mean is, social anxiety is not something random that can happen to you, like the same way that like you can be born an introvert. People are not usually born with social anxiety. What happens is the onset of it is around 9, 10, 11. And usually what happens is you are put in some sort of a psychologically traumatizing event that usually involves social humiliation that essentially teaches your brain that you should never speak up again. And like personally for me, I ended up going to, I ended up living in a small town by the time I was 9, 10, 11 that had 5,000 people in it with no racial diversity. And this was also a time of post 9/11 in America. My parents had come from Egypt, Middle Eastern. And I was basically placed in this environment where nobody around me looked like me at all. And then also you get this bullying, abuse, people telling me death threats, all this stuff, me seeing this as a kid, that basically made my brain fall into this regression of like, everyone hates you, nobody likes you. And then every situation, every environment that I was in, my brain was just like, Mark, look to the ground, don't talk to anybody, never speak up. And, that was my life for about 10 years. And that is extremely different than just being an introvert. And so I, like in a lot of different places, whether it was corporations or schools or wherever when I would go speak, I could almost like immediately see who had social anxiety because I had lived it. Like you can see it in their eyes. And I think the final thing that actually made me write this book, Brian, was when I actually began to do research and look at the data, I actually found out that social anxiety is the most common form of anxiety in America. And on top of that, out of all the other anxiety conditions, social anxiety is the most correlated with substance abuse as well as social isolation. Both social isolation and substance abuse are linked to higher rates of suicide. And when I was looking through my life, I was like, wait, I literally went through social anxiety, substance abuse, social isolation, and even suicide. And I'm like, wow, how many people out of the 850,000 people that commit suicide every year are doing so because they have social anxiety and they can't talk about it with other people? And then you begin to look at sort of society's mainstream solutions for kind of addressing mental health. Like, if someone's mental state really gets that low, then they can call the suicide hotline, a doctor, a therapist, and those are all great. But the reality is that it's hard enough for the average person to speak about their mental health issues. It is 10,000 times harder for someone who has social anxiety to speak on their mental health issues. And I could have easily seen myself, becoming a statistic, but I'm glad I didn't. And I'm glad I was able to write this book and just kind of show people like, hey, here is my own personal story so that people can use this as a vehicle for their own understanding. But then also I didn't want to write a book that just kind of like talked about my story and just kind of anecdotally told people, hey, here's what you can do. I really wanted to back it up by science and to show that there are like these real, verifiable, credible ways done through like peer-reviewed clinical studies that literally show, hey, this is what you do if you have social anxiety. Here's what works. Here's what doesn't work. Here's what could work. Here's what's probably not going to work for you. And so, yeah, that was like the major part of it. Like once I saw that, like once my brain like completed all these dots, I was like, I literally have to write a book because I personally don't see a book that kind of talks about this picture and how to like go about this and how to manage it in your own life?